Open secret that doesn't have a documentary about it yet? Story 1. There's an open secret in the world of professional sports that very few documentaries have touched on. The use of performance-enhancing substances by athletes even outside of major league sports. It's not just confined to the high-profile doping cases like Lance Armstrong or Marion Jones. Athletes across lesser-known sports, think tennis, swimming, and even esports, have quietly engaged in questionable practices, with the blessing of trainers, coaches, and sometimes even governing bodies that turn a blind eye. In fact, there's a network of people who profit from this hidden world, from underground clinics offering untraceable substances to coaches who skirt the rules with shady techniques that leave few traces. Why has there been little light shown on this? Well, the public loves their heroes. And for many of these athletes, success has become so closely tied to their sponsorships and contracts that the last thing they want is a scandalous documentary revealing the gritty reality of what's really happening behind closed doors. The sponsors and advertisers are deeply invested in keeping things quiet, so the whole system remains intact. An investigation that delves deep into the lives of athletes from smaller sports could unearth a complex web of silence, greed, and desperation that could shake the foundation of not just those individual sports, but sports as a whole. Yet for the most part, it remains an open secret that most turn a blind eye to. Story 2. For years, there's been an open secret in the world of Hollywood. Many iconic directors and producers have worked with and promoted known abusers in the industry, giving them second chances that most of us would never have. We're talking about individuals who have abused power in toxic ways and been accused of manipulating or even harming young actors and staff members. Yet, these individuals continue to climb the ladder of success, often ending up with even bigger projects and budgets after facing public scandals. What's worse is that these incidents have rarely been explored in a documentary format. While we know about some famous examples like Harvey Weinstein, the real extent of what happened behind the scenes often stays buried. How did so many talented young artists get lured into toxic environments? Why were accusations swept under the rug for so long? A documentary uncovering these stories could offer a critical look into how the system actually works, uncovering a deeper layer of exploitation and how those who abused power managed to keep getting jobs. It's easy to forget that the same people who create our favorite blockbusters may be complicit in perpetuating a system of harm. The stories of those who've suffered should be amplified, not brushed aside to maintain the status quo. Story 3. I have a story that's been an open secret in the world of tech, but no one talks about it. There's a large group of Silicon Valley startups that are quietly shaping the future of AI and robotics, with what can only be described as morally gray projects. Some of these tech giants are developing advanced surveillance software that operates under the guise of helping businesses improve efficiency. But in reality, they're enabling governments and private companies to conduct invasive monitoring on citizens. There's a fear of backlash, so these projects are kept low-key and not widely publicized. They're not explicitly illegal, but the ethics are questioned. Yet the companies involved are actively fundraising for the next big leap in AI, promising investors that this technology will be revolutionary for security and safety, all while collecting data that raises more alarms than it does praise. While this is not a grand conspiracy theory, it's a huge problem that could have a documentary exploring how the very technology that's supposed to help us is also being weaponized in the background. It's a huge open secret that's too complex for the general public to fully understand, but it's definitely something we should all be paying attention to. Story 4. Everyone thinks they know about the corruption that runs deep within the fashion industry, but there's one secret that's rarely discussed in the spotlight. The truth about the mental health struggles of the models behind the glamorous runway shows has only recently started getting attention, and even then, it's been minimal. The pressure to stay thin, perfect, and keep up with an industry that thrives on unrealistic beauty standards has led to extreme psychological distress for many models. But here's the real secret. The industry is not just complicit in exacerbating these issues. It actively encourages them. The unhealthy practices, like extreme dieting, intense workout regimes, and even dangerous surgeries, are often pushed by powerful designers or agencies, sometimes as part of contracts. Models are told that this is the only way to keep their careers alive. You'd think this would be something a documentary would jump on, but for whatever reason, the public often dismisses the struggles of these individuals, especially since the glamour of the industry overshadows the more tragic stories. It's an open secret, but it remains under the radar. A documentary exploring the mental health crisis in the modeling industry could be a game changer, revealing the true cost of fame in the fashion. Story 5. This one's a little darker, but it's something that's been going on for decades. The use of slave labor in the production of luxury goods, especially in parts of Asia. We're talking about major industries like fashion, electronics, and even food products that are unknowingly linked to forced labor and human trafficking. The public loves their brand new iPhones, their fancy sneakers, their exclusive luxury handbags. But how many of us ever stop to consider the hands that crafted them? It's one of those uncomfortable truths that companies don't want to address. Even when there's some kind of investigation or whistleblowing effort, the story usually gets buried beneath corporate press releases and reforms that often don't go far enough. The reason a documentary hasn't been made is probably due to how far-reaching the issue is. It involves some of the wealthiest companies in the world, and those at the top aren't eager to expose how much they've been profiting off exploitation. This is an open secret because, even though people know about it, they're willing to turn a blind eye in favor of convenience and luxury. A well-done documentary about the human cost of the goods we take for granted could bring this dark reality to the forefront, but the odds of it happening seem slim with so many powerful people working to keep it hidden. Story 6. A quiet, widespread secret in the world of academia. Universities often employ adjunct professors, highly educated, capable professionals, but treat them as second-class citizens. These adjuncts, sometimes with PhDs, work on short-term contracts with little to no benefits, often making less than minimum wage if you break down the hours they put in for grading and office hours. The secret here is that despite all of this, universities, especially elite ones, rely heavily on adjunct faculty to teach a large portion of their classes while continuing to boast about their world-class professors, who are supposedly the backbone of the institution. It's an open secret in higher education that adjuncts rarely have the opportunity for tenure, job security, or a decent salary. They juggle multiple teaching gigs at different institutions, scraping by to make ends meet. Yet, these same universities often make millions in endowments, charging students exorbitant fees. A documentary that follows the lives of these adjunct professors, their struggles to balance teaching, research, and survival, could highlight the darker side of higher education. It would bring attention to how the current system undervalues the very people who are shaping the minds of future generations. Despite the open nature of this truth, it's largely ignored or glossed over by most people, students included, who believe the fantasy of higher education being a noble, well-funded institution. Story 7. You might have heard of celebrities getting caught up in scandals or making shocking decisions, but there's a deeper open secret in Hollywood: the role of PR teams in shaping public personas and controlling information. These PR experts aren't just handling celebrity images, they're manipulating public opinion, managing scandals, and at times even silencing victims or potential whistleblowers. This goes far beyond just damage control after a small slip-up. In fact, some of the most well-known bad boys and bad girls in Hollywood are, in reality, carefully constructed personas that have been crafted to appeal to specific audiences. Meanwhile, the person behind the mask may be nothing like what we're led to believe. The secret lies in how these teams often work hand-in-hand with the media, feeding them stories that are perfectly tailored to maintain an image, control the narrative, or sideline inconvenient truths. While some celebrities use their influence for good, many others use their status to bury their wrongdoings under layers of curated content. A documentary could explore how much of what we think we know about celebrities is the product of savvy PR teams working tirelessly to keep everything in a perfect, digestible package. For the most part, this open secret remains untouched, likely because the media has become part of the machinery. It's easier to buy into the image than question the man behind the curtain. Story 8. There's a fascinating and widely known open secret in the world of high finance. Wealthy families often use charitable foundations and trusts not for altruistic causes, but as tools to hide their wealth and avoid taxes. These family-run, non-profit organizations, presented to the public as good-hearted philanthropies, can operate with little oversight, allowing the wealthiest people to move money around while claiming deductions. In many cases, these foundations are effectively used to maintain control of multi-generational fortunes while avoiding the public scrutiny and taxes that would apply to other forms of wealth. It's not just a matter of a few people playing the system. This has become a widespread practice used by some of the richest families around the world. The transparency and accountability of these foundations are minimal, and the money that's donated often ends up being funneled back into the family's businesses or used in ways that benefit them. While tax shelters like this aren't exactly illegal, they do expose a major flaw in the system, one that disproportionately benefits the ultra-wealthy while placing the burden on average citizens to pick up the slack. Yet, the public rarely talks about the real mechanics behind these charitable donations. A documentary diving into this underbelly of philanthropy could open people's eyes to how charitable giving is often nothing more than a well-crafted illusion of generosity. Story 9. We live in a world where the push for renewable energy is at an all-time high. And while that's great for the planet, there's a huge open secret surrounding the mining industry that fuels the green revolution: the production of lithium, cobalt, and rare earth metals. These materials are essential for everything from electric car batteries to solar panels and wind turbines. However, the mining practices used to extract these materials are wreaking havoc on local communities and the environment, particularly in places like the Congo, Bolivia, and Chile. While many corporations tout their green initiatives, they're often unaware of, or in some cases, choose to ignore, the extreme exploitation that's happening in the mining sector. The miners, many of whom are children or underpaid workers in dangerous conditions, are subjected to horrific labor practices, including exposure to toxic chemicals and violent working environments. Meanwhile, companies making billions off of the green revolution turn a blind eye to the damage their supply chains are causing. A documentary focusing on the human cost of these green technologies would shine a light on how truly sustainable these practices are. The people who mine the resources essential for the green movement are suffering, yet their plight is rarely discussed. It's one of the many contradictions of modern environmentalism, a secret that many would rather ignore, as it's uncomfortable to think about the true cost of going green. Story 10. In the world of corporate mergers and acquisitions, there's a chilling open secret. The entire process is often less about improving companies and more about eliminating competition and consolidating power. The strategy isn't about creating innovative solutions or better services. It's about buying up rivals, eliminating jobs, and absorbing market share. The true intent behind many of these massive mergers is to create monopolies and stifle competition, all while claiming to provide better services to customers. What most people don't realize is that the executives leading these deals often have little interest in the health of the companies they're merging. They're more concerned about getting their stock options, padding their bonuses, and creating larger-than-life conglomerates that are impossible to compete with. The workers, meanwhile, are left with layoffs, reduced wages, and less job security. A documentary that explores the secret world of corporate mergers would reveal the ugly side of corporate strategy and show how much of this is done at the expense of the people who actually work for these companies. It's a ruthless cycle that rewards a select few while putting pressure on everyone else. And it's an open secret that is rarely unpacked for public consumption. Story 11. There's a secret world of underground art deals that many people don't know about or choose to ignore. The huge role of money laundering in the art industry. The art world is one of the most opaque industries when it comes to financial transactions. And this secrecy allows wealthy collectors, investors, and even criminal organizations to use art as a tool to hide illicit wealth. High-priced art auctions are known for sketchy bids, anonymous buyers, and pieces changing hands with little to no transparency. But here's the real kicker. These works of art often aren't bought because of their cultural value, but because they're an easy way to store and transfer wealth while dodging taxes or, more disturbingly, money that was obtained through illegal means. What makes this open secret even more fascinating is how often these practices are shrugged off by the public. Art is seen as an investment, a symbol of status, and the possibility that some pieces might be helping launder money for criminal organizations is either ignored or never fully investigated. The idea that money is being funneled through multi-million-dollar paintings, sculptures, or artifacts has been around for a while, but it's rarely discussed publicly. A documentary uncovering the inner workings of art auctions, shady transactions, and the role of untraceable art sales in laundering money could expose a massive industry of financial manipulation. Yet this part of the art world continues to be hidden in plain sight, with only a select few people aware of its true function. Story 12. You've probably heard about tech companies taking over our personal data, but there's one open secret that still gets very little attention: how these companies profit off our emotional data. It's not just about clicks or likes anymore. It's about understanding the deepest corners of our emotional responses. Companies like Facebook, Instagram, and even some fitness apps are now collecting data on how we feel, what makes us anxious, what excites us, and what frustrates us. And this emotional data is far more valuable than any other kind because it allows these companies to predict behavior, influence decisions, and even manipulate moods to make us more likely to buy their products or engage with their content. The real kicker here is that this emotional data is often collected without our full understanding or consent. It's buried in privacy policies or terms of service, And while many of us opt in by using the apps, we have no idea just how much our emotions are being used against us. Companies are now training algorithms to not just analyze what we say or post, but to detect micro-expressions, our tone of voice, and even our physical movements to track how we're feeling in real time. A documentary investigating how tech companies are exploiting our emotions could reveal the full extent of this psychological manipulation and raise important questions about consent, privacy, and the human cost of being constantly watched. Story 13. In the fast food industry, there's an open secret about the addiction many of us have to these processed foods, and it's not just the taste, it's the chemicals. Fast food chains, particularly large ones, have long been working with food scientists to create hyperpalatable foods that trigger pleasure centers in our brains. But what most people don't know is that the ingredients in many fast food items are intentionally designed to make us crave more. These food scientists engineer the perfect combination of sugar, salt, and fat to maximize taste and increase consumption, creating a feedback loop that encourages overeating and addiction. The worst part? Many fast food companies know exactly how unhealthy their products are, yet they continue to promote them to vulnerable populations, including children, using flashy marketing campaigns and pricing strategies designed to make unhealthy choices more appealing. A documentary could explore the role of food scientists in crafting these addictive food combinations, as well as how marketing and industry tactics work to keep people coming back for more, despite the long-term health consequences. The open secret here is how much the food industry has weaponized its products, making us addicted to unhealthy food while pretending to be innocent in the whole process. Story 14. Another open secret in the world of large corporations is how many of them actively participate in and encourage wage theft. While many companies claim to pay fair wages, a significant number actually find ways to shortchange workers, particularly those in low-wage jobs. This can come in many forms: not paying overtime, misclassifying workers as exempt from overtime pay, pressuring employees to work off the clock, or even outright stealing tips and wages. Unfortunately, these practices are often so systemic and widespread that employees rarely speak out for fear of losing their jobs or facing retaliation. The open secret in this is that many companies rely on these illegal practices as a way to cut costs. They know that most workers won't file complaints, either because they don't realize their rights or because they fear losing their income. The industry even makes use of complex labor laws to make it difficult for workers to navigate their rights, leaving them vulnerable. A documentary focusing on how wage theft works in industries such as retail, food service, and hospitality could shed light on a hidden epidemic that affects millions of people across the globe. While the companies may claim to promote fair wages and rights, they often don't acknowledge how common and profitable these practices are. Story 15. There's a much-discussed open secret in the world of professional video games: the way esports teams and organizations exploit young talent for profit. While millions of dollars are made through advertising, sponsorships, and broadcast rights, the players themselves often receive little of the wealth generated by their success. In many cases, professional esports players sign contracts that tie them to teams for years, providing them with modest salaries while the organization reaps the majority of the rewards. These players are often young, some even underage, and lack the experience to properly navigate contract negotiations. These contracts sometimes include clauses that restrict players' ability to leave teams, impose unfair limits on their income, and even require them to sacrifice their personal lives in exchange for playing full-time. Despite the rising popularity of esports, the structure remains heavily tilted toward the organization's profit, leaving players with little to show for their hard work and talent. A documentary focusing on the inner workings of esports organizations and the hardships faced by players could highlight the darker side of what looks like an exciting, lucrative career. It would expose how the promises of fame and fortune rarely live up to the reality, as the business side of esports thrives off the exploitation of its stars. Story 16. An open secret in the world of fashion and beauty is how the concept of anti-aging has been marketed to billions of people, especially women, to push a multi-billion-dollar industry based on insecurities. From wrinkle creams to Botox injections, cosmetic surgery to miraculous supplements, the beauty industry has sold the idea that aging is something to be feared and fought at all costs. But what's rarely acknowledged is that many of these products and treatments do little to reverse the natural process of aging, and some of them may even be harmful in the long run. The real open secret here is that the constant push to maintain a youthful appearance has little to do with science and everything to do with maintaining a cycle of consumption. The more insecure people feel about their looks, the more likely they are to purchase expensive products promising the impossible. Yet, what's even more disturbing is how the beauty industry, aided by social media, perpetuates unrealistic standards of beauty that most people can never attain. This creates a constant pressure to buy into anti-aging products, leading to a cycle of self-doubt. A documentary that delves into how the beauty industry has capitalized on our fear of aging could explore the unspoken realities of how beauty standards have been manufactured, the dangers of these treatments, and how the industry preys on our insecurities. Story 17. There's a well-known open secret in the world of public health. While we're all told to exercise and eat healthily, the real culprits of poor health often lie in the environment around us. Public health campaigns focus on individual responsibility, but the truth is that many communities live in food deserts, where healthy fresh food is either too expensive or simply unavailable. In addition, environmental factors like pollution, unsafe housing, and poor access to healthcare play a much larger role in determining health outcomes than diet and exercise alone. Yet these issues are rarely addressed in the same way. For example, there are neighborhoods where fast food chains thrive because people don't have access to affordable groceries. But the narrative surrounding these communities often focuses on personal choices rather than systemic failure. The open secret here is that it's far more difficult to change health outcomes when people are living in environments that make it nearly impossible to live a healthy life. A documentary could shine a light on how policy, economic inequality, and environmental factors are shaping the health crisis in underserved communities. By focusing on these deeper issues, such a film would challenge the simple narrative that health is solely an individual responsibility and would reveal the systemic forces at play in shaping public health. Story 18. In the world of higher education, there's an unspoken truth about college admissions that few people are willing to acknowledge. Legacy admissions still play a significant role in determining who gets into prestigious universities, despite claims of a meritocracy. While schools publicly promote diversity and equal opportunity, many elite colleges continue to give preferential treatment to children of alumni, regardless of their academic credentials. This practice disproportionately benefits wealthy, often white, students, while locking out equally qualified applicants from disadvantaged backgrounds. The open secret is that legacy admissions, which account for a significant portion of all accepted students at top universities, have nothing to do with academic potential. They are purely about maintaining the social status quo and ensuring that wealthy families remain entrenched in the upper echelons of society. This is not to say that all students who benefit from legacy admissions are undeserving, but it's a practice that perpetuates inequality and privilege. A documentary about how legacy admissions continue to shape who gets access to higher education would expose the flawed systems at play and challenge the narrative that college admissions are based solely on merit. By focusing on the families who are benefiting from this practice, the documentary could reveal the stark disparities between those who have access to the right networks and those who don't. Story 19. Here's an open secret that's becoming more and more apparent in the world of artificial intelligence. The algorithms behind many of the popular technologies we use are deeply biased, yet they remain largely unchecked. While AI and machine learning have the potential to revolutionize industries, they also have the potential to amplify existing societal biases and injustices. The problem arises because many of these systems are trained on biased datasets, data that reflect the prejudices present in society, whether based on race, gender, or socioeconomic status. What's more concerning is that the companies behind these AI technologies often refuse to take responsibility for the harm their systems cause. Algorithms used in hiring, lending, and law enforcement often reproduce biases against people of color, women, and other marginalized groups, leading to discriminatory outcomes. Yet, because these systems are seen as objective or scientific, the biases are frequently overlooked or dismissed. A documentary that explores the development and real-world application of AI systems could expose the hidden dangers of these technologies, revealing how they reflect and perpetuate the biases of those who created them. It would call attention to the urgent need for regulation and transparency in the AI industry, and could serve as a wake-up call for consumers and policymakers alike. Story 20. An open secret in the world of celebrity endorsements is the extent to which brands rely on influencers to sell products they've never even used. While we see celebrities and influencers advertising everything from skincare products to fitness programs, The reality is that many of them are paid handsomely to promote items that they have little to no personal experience with. These influencers often receive a script and a paycheck, posting glowing reviews of products they've never tested or don't actually believe in. The truth is that the modern influencer economy is built on a complex system of paid promotions, where trust is sacrificed for financial gain. Companies know that their target audience, often younger, impressionable consumers, looks to influencers as reliable sources of information. As a result, brands pay top dollar for endorsements, knowing that these influencers have the power to sway opinions and drive sales. A documentary exposing this practice could reveal the often shady deals behind influencer marketing, highlighting how much of the content we consume is actually a paid advertisement disguised as an authentic recommendation. This open secret is one that many consumers are unaware of, making them more susceptible to marketing tactics that prioritize profit over genuine endorsement. Story 21. There's a secret world behind the luxurious world of professional fine dining that very few people are aware of: the intense pressure and exploitation faced by chefs, particularly those working in high-end restaurants. The chef celebrity culture, glorified by shows like Chef's Table and Iron Chef, often paints a picture of culinary brilliance and passion, but the reality is much darker. Chefs, especially those in Michelin-starred kitchens, are often subject to grueling work hours, low wages, and a toxic, hierarchical environment that prioritizes perfection at the expense of their well-being. One of the worst open secrets in the industry is the rampant mental health struggles among chefs, from severe stress to burnout, depression, and even suicide. These chefs are expected to give up their personal lives, with little to no time for family or self-care. A significant portion of the staff works unpaid overtime, often putting in 12 to 16-hour days without any guarantee of fair compensation or recognition. Despite all of this, the media continues to romanticize the work, focusing on the glamour of the final dish rather than the immense toll it takes on the people who create it. A documentary that exposes the internal workings of top-tier restaurants, exploring the lives of the chefs behind the scenes, would reveal a harsh, often broken system that still operates despite its many flaws. These chefs are often seen as heroes for their culinary masterpieces, but few people understand the true cost of achieving such greatness. Story 22. An open secret in the world of environmentalism. Many of the most well-known green companies that claim to care about the planet are, in fact, contributing to environmental destruction behind the scenes. These companies, often praised for their commitment to sustainable products or practices, often rely on supply chains that are heavily polluting or exploitative. For instance, many so-called eco-friendly clothing brands, while promoting organic cotton and ethically sourced fabrics, still engage in practices like fast fashion that ultimately contribute to waste and environmental degradation. The most glaring issue is how some of these companies outsource production to countries with less stringent environmental laws, allowing them to cut costs while dumping toxic waste into rivers or using unsustainable farming practices. Despite their marketing efforts, these businesses are simply using green as a buzzword to attract customers while continuing to prioritize profit over genuine environmental responsibility. A documentary could dig into the greenwashing phenomenon, pulling back the curtain on some of the biggest names in the sustainability movement and showing how, in reality, many are just as harmful to the planet as the corporations they claim to replace. By focusing on the complex global supply chains and the realities of mass production, it would expose how these companies are using environmental responsibility as a marketing tool rather than as a true ethical commitment. Story 23. There's a major open secret in the world of pharmaceutical marketing that many don't realize. Drug companies have been aggressively pushing medication for conditions that many people don't even have. With the help of slick advertising campaigns, sponsorship of doctors, and lobbying efforts, pharmaceutical companies have created new markets for medications by convincing people that they need treatment for conditions that were either invented or exaggerated. The rise of medications for conditions like generalized anxiety disorder or mild depression, conditions that previously wouldn't have warranted prescription drugs, has skyrocketed in recent. A huge part of the problem is the role that Big Pharma plays in shaping the way people think about their health. Doctors are often encouraged or incentivized to prescribe these medications, sometimes to patients who could benefit from therapy or lifestyle changes instead. Pharmaceutical companies continue to push for more prescriptions because the market for antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, and even painkillers is incredibly lucrative. A documentary on the practice of disease monk could expose how pharmaceutical companies, through strategic marketing and manipulation of the medical community, have turned millions of people into lifelong customers. It would highlight the real cost of overmedication, the rise of drug dependence, and how these practices have shaped the landscape of mental health treatment in ways that are often more harmful than helpful. Story 24. There's an open secret in the world of venture capital. Many of the most famous venture capitalists are not as savvy or innovative as they appear, and their wealth often comes from being in the right place at the right time, sometimes profiting off of others' work. While many venture capitalists are celebrated for their ability to discover the next big startup or build a tech empire, much of their wealth is actually due to their early investments in companies that were already well on their way to success. These investors often jump into companies just as they start gaining traction, providing capital, but also taking credit for their rise. Furthermore, the way venture capital works often results in the exploitation of founders and their teams. Once a company is funded, investors often push for fast growth, pushing out original team members, imposing aggressive targets, or forcing companies to adopt business models that are more profitable but less aligned with their original mission. Venture capitalists may hold all the cards in these deals, and the promises of growth and opportunity often come with significant downsides for the people who are actually doing the work. A documentary diving into the world of venture capital could explore how much of the hype surrounding Silicon Valley's most successful companies is built on a narrative of disruption that doesn't take into account the risks and sacrifices that many entrepreneurs make. It would shed light on how much of the tech world's success can be attributed to the manipulation of funding, timing, and market conditions, rather than the brilliance of the idea or the work of the founders. Story 25. A lesser-known but growing open secret in the world of luxury goods is the use of counterfeit materials to produce high-end products. Many luxury brands, while maintaining an image of exclusivity and quality, have been caught using cheaper, mass-produced materials to cut costs. For example, certain luxury handbags or designer shoes might be touted as made with high-quality leather. But the truth is that they often use synthetic substitutes or low-grade materials that are disguised with advanced techniques. These cheaper alternatives are used to increase profit margins while maintaining the illusion of exclusivity. Furthermore, the process of creating these luxury items is often not as artisanal as advertised. Some items are produced in factories overseas where workers earn minimal wages and work in substandard conditions. Despite the promise of fine craftsmanship, many of these products are mass-produced in ways that contradict the very idea of luxury. A documentary exposing this hidden side of the luxury industry could uncover how brands are using consumer desire for exclusivity to deceive people into paying inflated prices for items that may not be worth the cost. It would dive into the complex world of material sourcing, the ethics behind production, and how the demand for luxury goods is often driven by marketing tactics rather than genuine quality. Story 26. There's a disturbing open secret in the world of luxury travel and private jets. The environmental toll of private aviation is often downplayed or ignored entirely. While the public is encouraged to fly commercially to reduce carbon footprints, the rich and powerful continue to travel in private jets, which have a far greater environmental impact. The carbon emissions from a single private flight are often many times greater than those from an entire commercial flight. Yet the industry maintains an image of eco-friendly luxury with green certifications and carbon offsetting programs. The reality is that the greenwashing efforts in the private jet industry are rampant. Many of these jets are extremely inefficient, burning thousands of gallons of fuel for just a few passengers, and the companies that provide these services often don't do nearly enough to mitigate the environmental damage. On top of that, the cost of using these private jets is so high that it's essentially reserved for the elite, perpetuating a system that allows the wealthiest individuals to ignore the very environmental crises they often claim to care about. A documentary focusing on the hypocrisy of private aviation could expose how the industry relies on a facade of sustainability while continuing to contribute to climate change in a disproportionate way. It could reveal the true environmental costs of private travel, and how efforts to offset emissions often fall far short of what's needed to make a meaningful difference. Despite its growing awareness, the environmental impact of private jets remains an open secret among the rich and untouchable. Story 27. In the world of professional wrestling, there is an open secret that remains hidden behind the spectacle: the physical toll it takes on the performers. Fans see the intense matches, the flashy characters, and the larger-than-life personas, But what they don't see is the endless physical pain and injuries that wrestlers endure throughout their career. Professional wrestlers are often subjected to severe physical trauma, broken bones, concussions, torn ligaments, and internal injuries. The pressure to keep performing regardless of injury is immense, especially in an industry where toughness is valued above health. Many wrestlers are often expected to work through serious injuries, masking pain with painkillers and other substances, and some even suffer from long-term neurological damage from repeated head injuries. The fact that so many wrestlers retire with debilitating health issues, some even dying young, has become an open secret in the industry. Behind the glitz and glam of wrestling promotions is a system that exploits the body of its talent, pushing them to the breaking point. A documentary focusing on the brutal realities of a wrestler's life, both during and after their careers, would reveal the true cost of fame in the ring. It would expose the systemic abuse of performers who are often seen as disposable by large wrestling organizations and show the personal, physical sacrifices that go largely unacknowledged. This hidden side of the wrestling industry is rarely shown to the public, as the entertainment value of the sport takes precedence over the well-being of the athletes who make it all possible. Story 28. One of the most widely known open secrets in the world of media is the bias and influence of corporate ownership on news outlets. While news organizations are often seen as impartial sources of information, many of them are owned by large corporations with their own agendas. These corporations can and do shape the content that is delivered to the public, either by selecting which stories are covered or influencing the tone of reporting. The most dangerous aspect of this phenomenon is how it affects the political and social landscape. Major news outlets often avoid covering stories that may hurt their corporate interests or challenge their political affiliations. This leads to a skewed portrayal of events, with certain perspectives or issues being either underreported or ignored altogether. For example, environmental concerns, labor rights issues, and corporate corruption may be minimized or portrayed in a way that avoids alienating corporate advertisers or political donors. A documentary exploring the corporate control over media outlets could uncover how much of the news we consume is influenced by financial interests rather than journalistic integrity. It would examine how this affects public opinion, the way issues are framed, and how this kind of media manipulation distorts democracy. Though it's an open secret that the media landscape is deeply influenced by corporate ownership, the full extent of this manipulation is rarely explored, making it a perfect subject for a critical and eye-opening documentary. Story 29. In the high-stakes world of Wall Street, one open secret is how often traders and institutional investors engage in practices that would be considered highly unethical in any other industry. Insider trading, market manipulation, and information asymmetry are rampant, but they are often dismissed as part of the game by those in the know. These practices, while technically illegal, are hard to prove and are often defended by powerful individuals who can afford the best legal representation. Traders with access to inside information frequently make millions, while smaller investors are left in the dust, unaware of the behind-the-scenes deals that are taking place. The truth is that the entire stock market operates on a foundation of inequality, where those with the right connections are able to profit off of information that the average investor will never have access to. This often leads to wealth disparity, as large institutional investors make the rules, while smaller players are at a disadvantage. The public may think that the stock market is a fair place to grow wealth, but the reality is that it's rigged in favor of the rich. A documentary that exposes the underhanded practices of Wall Street could shine a light on the secretive world of insider trading, market manipulation, and the pervasive influence of large investment firms on global financial markets. It would reveal how these practices contribute to wealth inequality and the erosion of trust in the financial system. Despite being an open secret among insiders, this world is rarely explored in depth, and it's one that most average investors never see or even suspect. Story 30. One of the most underappreciated open secrets in the tech industry is the extent to which companies rely on underpaid and overworked contract employees to build their products. While large tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Apple are often seen as leading the charge in innovation, much of the actual labor that goes into making these companies so successful is done by a vast workforce of contract employees who don't receive the same benefits, job security, or pay as their full-time counterparts. These contract workers, many of whom are in customer service or data entry roles, work long hours with few benefits, often facing job insecurity as their contracts are regularly renewed for just a few months at a time. They are crucial to the success of these companies but are treated as disposable, with little regard for their well-being or future. While tech companies may tout their forward-thinking work environments and generous employee benefits, these perks are usually reserved for their full-time staff, while contract employees are left to fend for themselves. A documentary exploring the lives of these contract workers could shed light on the labor exploitation hidden behind the glossy surface of tech companies. It would provide an inside look at how these workers are treated and reveal the stark contrast between the public image of these companies and the reality of how they treat their most vulnerable employees. This open secret remains largely ignored, as the focus remains on the success stories of the top executives and the wealth generated by the company, rather than the workers who make it all possible. Story 31. In the world of tech, one of the most glaring open secrets is how many companies manipulate their users' data without their knowledge. While most people are aware that tech giants like Google and Facebook collect data for targeted ads, fewer understand the sheer extent of this practice and how much it shapes not just ads, but entire business models. It's no longer just about showing you ads for things you've already searched. Now these companies track and analyze every move you make online, from what time you open your apps to the mood of your social media posts. This data is then sold, shared, or used to create predictive models that influence what content you see, who you interact with, and even your political opinions. The real open secret is that tech companies are able to build incredibly detailed profiles of users, sometimes without their full consent or understanding. These profiles are not just based on your interactions with their platforms, but on every digital footprint you leave behind. Location data, purchase history, health data from fitness trackers, and even voice data from your smartphone's assistant. The result is an industry that thrives on a business model where user privacy is an afterthought, yet the majority of people are either unaware or too passive to protest. A documentary could explore how these companies collect and use data in ways that most users don't even fully grasp. The film could delve into how this data is used to manipulate consumer behavior, subtly shaping people's decisions and emotions, and raise questions about the future of privacy in a world that runs on personal information. Despite being an open secret, this remains largely overlooked in mainstream media, as people have grown numb to the extent of their data being monetized. Story 32. Behind the glamour of Hollywood blockbusters, there's an open secret. Many of the biggest film studios regularly exploit their actors and other talent. The contracts that actors sign, especially early in their careers, often lock them into deals that are deeply unfair. While these actors might earn millions for starring in major films, the back-end deals, especially for those who don't have major bargaining power, are designed to give them a fraction of the profits. In many cases, actors don't get a fair share of the revenue from merchandise, video game adaptations, or streaming services, even if their likeness or performance is central to these products. On top of this, the working conditions on set are often grueling. Actors can be required to work long hours, sometimes for weeks or months on end, with little regard for their mental or physical health. The pressures to stay in shape, look perfect, and maintain a public persona can be overwhelming. Many young stars are manipulated into signing contracts they don't fully understand, promising them fame and fortune, only to find themselves caught in an industry system that prioritizes profits over their well-being. A documentary diving into the world of film contracts and exploitation could reveal just how deeply the industry profits from the talents and sacrifices of its performers. It would highlight the ways in which Hollywood's glamour is built on the backs of actors who are often taken advantage of and left with very little once the spotlight dims. Though this has been an open secret for years, it rarely gets the attention it deserves.